Thank you so much. It means a lot. Um, so before I hand over the spotlight to you, Juney, I just want to make sure, one, I am pronouncing your name correctly.
Yep.
Great, perfect, awesome. And two, asking if at the end of your presentation, just keep it on screen. Graham is our, I guess, video producer right now, and he has everything set up to capture everything.
All right.
All right, excellent. And with that, the floor is yours. Everyone, remember to keep your mics on. If you have any questions, place them in the Crash Course chat.
All right. So, hi. I am a very normal person in a crazy industry, and I hope that sharing a little bit about my journey can help you get a bit of an idea of what the different roles in the industry are, how you can get them, and just what kind of crazy flavors everything comes in. About me, I am a programmer by degree. And during my studies, I realized that programming wasn't for me. And towards the end of my bachelor's, I realized that I loved the academic part, I loved the research, I loved the math, I loved the theory, I loved putting groups together, I loved the planning, but I didn't like sitting down and actually doing the coding. However, I also wasn't ready for the real world, so I decided to do a master's degree in exactly the same direction. And that kind of worked out for me. I learned a lot from it, have a much better understanding of how all of that works. And alongside my studies, I always organized events in the game development industry. So, for example, I organized network events for maybe like 200 students and then 30 companies, and I would ask them to go and find internship matches. I also started a conference called In Development for students by students. We, over the course of 4 years, we grew that from 250 attendees to the fourth year had 1,000. And we had a lot of speakers from all over the world. We had an expo area, everything that comes with the usual conferences. And at the fourth iteration of that conference, also my graduation year, SOEDESCO was one of the sponsors, and they had seen on my LinkedIn that I would be graduating, that I was looking for a job. And I knew I'm not a programmer. Well, I am a programmer, but I'm not going to do that for the rest of my life. I also didn't really know what I would be doing. I knew I wanted to be in the game industry, or at least in the interactive experiences industry at large, but no idea. So they said, we know that we need a producer, but we don't really know what a producer does. And I figured it appears to be something related to organizing things. That's something that I've been doing for a while, so I can give it a shot. SOEDESCO at the time was still pretty small, so they didn't really know much about that either. Yeah, so that's where I sort of started. Up until that time, I'd been accumulating a lot of different experiences that I would eventually end up finding very useful. So as you can see from all the different pictures, I've been doing a lot of different things on my own journey. Alongside my studies, I would help fan sites for games. So I would maintain an item database for a game called Neopets, where you could collect all the different items out there. I would eventually design seasonal events in a live ops kind of way for a spin-off site for Neopets called Mycena Cave. I would be basically doing everything from designing the original concept to hosting the event to doing the player research, all along the way with player surveys and that sort of thing. I did a literature study on game user research, on analyzing games and players, both the quantitative as well as the qualitative side, and as mentioned, organized a lot of events. So I also supported the IGDA with several events, and yeah, it gave me a very varied background that I was able to then take with me as I moved to video game publisher SOEDESCO, based here in the Netherlands. They focus on PC and console games. They do both digital and retail and worldwide. And when I joined, I was approximately the fourth full-time employee, and they shared a couple of employees with their sister company. And at SOEDESCO, I joined as the first producer. And and we were focused on, we had a history in retail, so that's where we started bringing indie titles to retail. And from there, we started expanding. So we started adding digital publishing. We started going to Nintendo Switch as well. But we also started to provide more services. So instead of just doing age ratings and localization, the most standard things that you always need for a retail release, we also started offering things like external testing, but also community management. We also started offering ports and supporting with everything else that a developer might need on the outsourcing front, on the licensing front, everything that comes with that. And over the course of 5 years, I built out the publishing pipeline. So we made sure that we were able to basically release any game on a console and PC. We grew from 5 to 30 people in that time. And something that I had to discover for myself along the way was I couldn't manage to squeeze all of that work in my own timeline anymore, in my own 40 hours. And that was something that I always considered to be my fault up to that point. So for nearly a year, I struggled with how do I still manage to do everything that needs to be done for these 15 projects that we're running at the same time. And eventually, I discovered that's not my fault, and maybe we should start hiring more people. So from there, I grew a publishing production team to anywhere between 4 and 8 people, depending on how many interns we had at any given time. And we started building out that publishing pipeline in a very modular fashion. So it would be something that any producer could basically pick up at any point in the timeline, and they would have the support with the rest of the team that they needed to be able to get any release out of the door, even if they hadn't done something for the first time yet. And alongside that, we also discovered that we could probably do simple ports in-house. So I also helped build and run a porting team in-house. So we had up to 6 programmers working on 4 ports at the same time, usually from Unity to from PC to console, where we were basically able to do in-house what we were previously doing externally. And over the course of those 5.5 years at SOEDESCO, I helped bring over 50 titles to market. And as mentioned, that would be digital and retail, console and PC, worldwide. And we went through everything from the digital deluxe editions to the physical limited editions, from every genre you can imagine, from developers all over the world. So it was an absolute roller coaster. It was super exciting, learned so much, and I'm very grateful for that. Especially because, well, every project is a unicorn. They all came with their own new things to learn, basically. However, at some point, I also realized that the work at SOEDESCO was no longer as challenging as it was at the beginning. So when you've released your 40th game on Steam, that specific challenge is no longer that big. And I personally discovered for myself that I get a thrill when I feel this very uncomfortable feeling in my gut that this is something that I've never done before. This is something that's very intimidating. It scares the hell out of me. But I kind of want to see if I can do it. And that is something that I wasn't getting so much anymore. So I took a step back. I took a bit of time to learn more about myself, what I wanted to do next. And then the next step in my journey arrived. Paradox reached out to me. They had several roles open that might fit me. And I started interviewing with them. And initially, they really wanted me to move to Sweden. That was something that I wasn't ready for at that time. And I very openly said that, like, this is not the right position, the right time for me to move. So while I would love to work with you, I've always loved your games, there just isn't a fit right now. And eventually they had reviewed my profile again, reviewed the other candidates that they had for the role. And I had suggested to them, well, you have a development studio called Triumph Studios in Delft. And Delft is right around the corner from me. Like, my commute would actually be getting shorter. I'd be happy to work for your publishing team from the Delft office. And they said, we'll give that some thought. And a couple weeks later, they got back to me and said, you know what? We're going to take you up on that. I was absolutely over the moon. And they hired me as their legacy portfolio manager, which means that I'm in basically a mini CEO in charge of all the different games that are no longer in active development, and I get to find new and exciting opportunities for whatever we have. And as you can see from all the pretty key art, there's a lot of stellar games in that portfolio. So I'm super excited to be engaging in that. And there is a lot of stuff to learn from the over 700 people that are employed at the company right now. They focus on games that have basically defined my childhood, my teens, and even now. So I've only been with them since the middle of January, so it's been a very exciting, interesting journey so far, just figuring out how a large company works, how it works to work on titles of that scale, to work with people with more specialized roles, to have a lot of people in the company with a lot of experience that I can ask for a second perspective on just about anything. And that's just super exciting. Alongside that, I also sort of accidentally started a Discord server at the end of July last year. And it's kind of grown up and out of proportion over the course of time. By now, we have over 1,200 professionals with a focus on production, project management, product management, but also everything related to that. So we also have a lot of students who are trying to break into the industry. We have people who are in QA, in narrative, studio leadership a lot as well. And the general discourse in the Discord is about how can you improve your production pipelines, but also how can you do that in a healthy and sustainable way. So the different topics that come up are things around planning and organization, and what sort of software can you use, and what different processes do people engage in at their studios. So there's a heavy focus on how to improve communication, how can you be a better leader, but also how can you grow better in your role yourself, so on career development. So there's a lot of knowledge exchange. For example, we have weekly topic starters that will focus on production related topics or leadership topics, anything like that. We also have a couple of channels dedicated to giving advice, so things like career advice and portfolio and resume advice. We do panels, Q&As, interviews. We recently did one with Valve, Q&A for everything related to Steam. We recently did a panel on Agile and Scrum, and we've got a Q&A with ID at Xbox coming up on May 14th as well. So that's also very exciting. Yeah, and that's been going a lot better than I expected. So that's also something that's going on in my life. And for the rest of the session, I basically just wanted to open up the floor to whatever questions you might have. I think in the past 6 years, I've been able to experience a lot of things. I've been very fortunate in everything that I've been able to do. And I suspect there are things that I've experienced that other people aren't as familiar with yet. So ask me. Like, worst thing I can do is tell you that I don't know about it. And that is something that I will frequently say because, I know absolutely nothing. But just on the off chance there's something that I know that I can help you with, I'm here for you to ask me anything. And of course, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, tell me what you want to hear me talk about, basically. Let's see, I'm hopping over. Yeah, Neopets. Exactly. You helped release 40 games on Steam, just at one company. Yeah, it's a kind of a lot of games, isn't it? So SOEDESCO is a publisher that originated with a focus on indie games. Oh, I'm getting a notification that my stream was paused or stopped to save resources. Yeah, so SOEDESCO originated with a background in indie games, and that means that the games that we were doing were all pretty small, and that means you have a lot of bandwidth to be able to do a lot of different things at the same time, especially when a few of them aren't like the massive scale things. So some of them wouldn't be all platforms and digital and retail. Some of them, they would only start on Steam. What's the secret to actually shipping a game? I don't know. I think we worked, as I mentioned, we released over 50 games. We worked with many more developers, and out of all of those, I think there were maybe 2 that delivered a build to me on time, and all the others didn't. I didn't get the chance to ask those devs after the fact, like, how were you able to do it? But what it came down to was a lot of experience, and what I suspect a lot of experienced producers also buffering and making very healthy estimates of what they would be able to do within the amount of time allotted and the amount of budget that was reserved. Let's see. Do I have any suggestions for people who want to migrate from another area to game development, especially if they want to work remote or for another country? For example, when you're coming from web dev. So the very easy, straightforward answer is make games. So you just have to spend the time to learn a little bit about the different engines that are out there. You have to participate in things like game jams, and then just start learning what the different roles in the industry are. So just being here and learning about what a producer does, about what some organizing events in the game industry does, that's already step 1. But you also have to go figure out and talk to artists, talk to programmers, talk to designers, like, what is it that you do? And then try to learn about that and try to get experience doing the same thing. When it comes to when you want to work remotely or from another country, the current circumstances in the world are absolutely horrendous, but they do cause acceleration in the amount of companies that are willing to hire remotely. Having been on a little bit of a soul search since in the move from SOEDESCO to Paradox myself, I've definitely seen a lot of companies that are willing to work with people remotely, and I hope that's only going to grow. But it does come with its own challenges. So it's not for everyone. It's not going to be every company either. And it just means you have to keep your eye out for what's out there. And yeah, also, when it comes to working for a company in another country, if you do find a company that you want to apply to that is in a different country, it helps a lot to start reading up on everything on the legalese side with how that works. Because it is going to be complex, and that company is also going to struggle with figuring out all the details of being able to hire you. So knowing whether it would even be possible for you to sign with them, or if you have to work as a freelancer to be able to work with them, those are all things that you can start to read up on once you have an idea of what kind of companies in what kind of countries you want to apply to. Let's see. Do I know of any company or startup that takes interns, even if it's with no income, to work for free or to get experience? So that entirely depends per country. In some countries, you are not allowed to take interns that are not currently enrolled in some form of education. The Netherlands is one example of that. So I would never be able to hire an intern who wasn't currently in a bachelor's or a master's kind of program. So that already limits the amount of countries that even can consider where the companies can even consider taking interns. I think there are plenty of companies and startups alike that take interns, so it's really just a matter of taking a good look at the websites of the studios that are out there that interest you, and start talking to people from those companies, and be polite about that. Don't be like, hey, I want to add you on LinkedIn. I'm going to ask you all the questions, because that person is probably not the hiring manager. But see what companies are out there that interest you. See if they're okay with answering a few questions about what it's like to work there, if they take interns, that sort of thing. But plenty of them do. Let's see. How did you go about management with interns? So that is a good question. For me, we started hiring interns a couple years in, and the kind of intern that you can get varies wildly. That also comes with the Dutch educational system, which I won't bore you with the details, but we have interns that are more focused on the work experience, and we have interns that are more focused on the research kind of experience. So that made a big difference in the way that we would treat educating them, because their goal from their education would be different. Many of them were just work interns trying to get hands-on experience, and for them, what we would try to do is to slowly expose them to the different topics that are very modular, that are the tasks that you can basically allow them to sit down and go figure out and ask us questions if need be. So for example, they would get experience with how to install builds, how to do a smoke test on a build, how to record gameplay footage for age ratings, how to prepare a localization sheet. These are all things that will definitely take a good chunk of time, but you can also figure it out largely on your own. So that is the way that we ended up onboarding interns. What I would also then do is do a one-on-one with them every single week. That was always 15 minutes, but it could be longer if they wanted to. And that would be the opportunity for them to talk to me about anything that they needed from me or from the rest of the team. That could be learning, that could be stuff they needed for school, that could be stuff related to the tasks that they were currently engaged in, or just stuff in their personal life that they wanted some support for, or just a listening ear for. And lastly, I also very heavily stimulated my interns to have their own voice, because the key part about interns and about juniors is that they come in with a fresh perspective. And when you have published over 40 or over 50 games in the end, you are going to get tunnel vision in the procedures that you engage in. So for example, our testing checklist for builds that came in from developers was ordered just in a way that we wrote it down at the beginning, basically. And especially the more senior people would start where it made sense for that build, because we knew. But then an intern would pick up that checklist and they would start at the top, because of course you start at the top, right? And then gradually they discovered, wait, but this item on line 17, that's a deal breaker, and it's something that you can check very quickly. Shouldn't that be at the top? And I'm like, you are absolutely right. I always started on line 17, but I don't know why. Like, I knew that I had to start there because it was the most efficient, but that was just not something that we communicated in that checklist. So I told my intern, like, this is fantastic feedback, and now I would like you to take ownership of reformatting the checklist so that it makes sense. And that is something that we started doing with the interns, but also with the juniors that we hired more and more, to give them example of, hey, it's important that you give your feedback because you are seeing things that we're no longer seeing. You are making changes, optimizations to everyone's process. This is something that can help everyone on our team, regardless of how much experience they have. So our interns were absolutely vital in making sure that we sanity tested everything that we were doing, basically. So if there's any specific questions about managing interns, happy to answer, but that is the general gist of it. Let's see. Can you share some info on how publishers vet projects? In your opinion, what do publishers look out for in particular? So that is entirely dependent on the publisher and on the project that you are looking at. There is no one size fits all for that. You have publishers who are looking for projects in a specific genre. You have publishers that are looking for certain budgets, and there are publishers that only have so much space in their timeline. So there are a few aspects that must match for you to even be considered by a publisher. And even then, there are plenty of reasons for it just not to be the right time, not to be the right fit for the portfolio, not to be the right time for their budget at that point. So it's more about making sure that you meet with them at the exact right time and have the right project for what they are looking for at all. As for how they then, so say you manage to meet those first few boxes, I can only speak for one publisher, so every publisher is going to be different, but generally the first step is checking if you meet those initial green light sort of checkboxes, like do you fit your team, your project, your budget, your timeline, does that fit with who we are as a publisher? Then what do you need from a publisher, right? So do you only want to bag money all the way at the beginning, or do you want someone that can be a partner to you in every single way that you need, or any flavor in between? Do you only want us to help bring the game to market, or do you want us to support with the community, with localization, with age rating? So that is also going to be part of that initial exploration. Once that's been figured out, I actually gave a talk on the next step. That is the sort of deep dive pitch assessment that we did, was due diligence. Like, who is your team? How long have they been working together? What does your game look like? What game modes are there? Where are the risks? What kind of engine have you developed in? Do you have a lot of third-party content? Do you have anything basically that could cause a risk down the line? That's where I would step in to assess before we even got to the signing stage. And that would be really to make sure that we were entirely aligned, and to minimize risk, to figure out if there was anything that could cause a problem in the future. And if so, that would be something to start a conversation about. It wouldn't be an immediate deal breaker, but they are points of like, hey, this is something where we may not align, or that is very risky. What are your thoughts on that? So yeah, that basically. For what publishers look out for in particular, I think the only common denominator is that all publishers have teams that they need to feed. And that means that for them, it's just as important as for a developer to minimize risk and to choose the projects that they can actually properly support. You don't want to sign a team if you can't guarantee that you can help them. So minimizing risk is something that I've seen all around. But if you talk about what about a project, or what about a team that a publisher looks for, it's unicorns all around. So there's nothing specific in my experience. Let's see. What's one of the most challenging yet fulfilling things you've done on a project before? So that's not going to be easy to answer because I've done a lot of challenging things. I think the thing that jumps to mind is actually not a pleasant experience at all. Even looking back at it, was when one of my most senior people from one day to the next disappeared. We still don't exactly know why that was, but possibly burnout. We were not able to get back in touch with them, but that also meant that our biggest project was basically an orphan, and there were several other projects that, well, no longer really had a producer to guide them. And that was definitely something that I had to deal with as like the person in a leadership position to the rest of my team, because this was suddenly going to, all these projects were going to fall on the response, on like the plates of the other producers and myself. We were going to have to figure out how can we distribute that work, how can we still make sure that everyone can be healthy, be balanced, and as such, like, what are we going to have to put on the shelf for a little while to be able to manage this workload? But also, like, that is just the operational part. How do you deal with that as a person, as someone that has just lost a colleague, someone that has just lost someone they hired for the very first time, right? So that was definitely one of a very memorable, very challenging moment that I learned a lot from as a person, as a leader, as a producer. But gosh, that was grueling and that was harsh. I can't really get around that. Next one. What is your favorite game genre / type, and have I developed any of them? For me, there are a few genres that have always jumped out at me. I have always played a lot of JRPGs. I have not worked on any of them. So anything Final Fantasy, Tales of, anything like that, of Mana as well. And otherwise, Pokemon has been big in my life. I did manage to work on a game called Monster Crown that was also in my slides. And that is also it's not a taming or catching game. It's a little different focus. It's more like creating your perfect monster rather than catching them all. But that was definitely scratching that itch of something that I was very passionate about. As for working on other games that really appeal to me, I ended up, after so many games, I ended up discovering that it became more meaningful to me to almost see my producers like my projects. So at some point, when you've released that many games, the next release is no longer as exciting as the first one was. But then there was one release, one of the first, where one of the producers that I hired, she had her first game release. And at the launch party, she just started bawling. And I saw her, and that made me emotional because it was like my baby bird just took flight. So for me, it started to become about, how can I help my producers be successful? How can I help my porting team be successful? Rather than how can I bring a game to market, because I'd already been doing that for a while. So yeah, I guess the industry eventually became my challenge, became my game. And that sort of made its way into Paradox as well, because now it's no longer just dealing with the next game that you're going to release or the next person that you're going to help, but making good business, like looking at your portfolio and seeing where the best opportunities are to bring in just a good business in general, but also bringing players the experiences that they deserve and desire, basically. So yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but yeah, that is what I get my satisfaction from these days, rather than just developing and publishing games. Do I have a preference on working for a bigger or a smaller company, and if so, why? For me, it's definitely not about company size. I am a lifelong learner. I know that I know nothing, and that there is always more out there for me to learn, and that there are challenges that I would love to throw myself at, because I know that it helps me develop, so I can be of better use to my team, to my the games that I work on, to the company that I work for, and I'm going to try and apply myself with the team or the project or the company that allows me to grow, while at the same time feeling like I can be of use to them. And that is very important to me. That is what I get my satisfaction from, basically. Doesn't really matter to me what the size of the company is. For me, working with people that inspire me is first place. Working on experiences that I feel can make a difference in the world, whether that is through entertainment or through something that is otherwise meaningful, comes second. And then the company or the pay or other benefits that comes after. But I have to say that comes from my exceptionally fortunate and privileged position of having been born and raised in the country that I was, because I know that not everyone has that luxury. Next question. What were some of the transitions into being a publisher like for you? What stood out as a lesson which made you more effective at it? So I will be very honest, I have never been a developer. I was a programmer, but that was in university. That was not making actual games. So I've made a couple of prototypes, and as I mentioned, I was a freelance, sort of like voluntary designer for a game, but that was never a job. So I don't feel like I've ever, in a paid format, developed games. So being a publisher is all I know, and that's not something that I can describe as a transition in a sense. So it's what I did learn is that being a publishing producer is much more my thing than being a development producer. And I learned that from the producers that I hired. In my perspective, every producer is a person who removes obstacles out of the way of their team members to allow them to be better at the job that they're doing. But the emphasis is different. So the people that I hired were much more development producers than publishing producers. They wanted to be in their team, among team members. They wanted to see the impact that they were having on the people around them. They were very good in one-on-one communication, in empathy and interpersonal relations. And that was not that still isn't, and it probably never will be, my strength. For me, I had much more of a high level bird's eye view of the situation. I could plan, I could organize, and I'm pretty good with writing formal emails, just doing the long distance communication, just the sort of more relationship management kind of things. So along the way, I discovered that I'm much more of a publishing producer, and I kind of rolled into the right place. And I have a lot of admiration for the producers that I ended up hiring, who absolutely excelled at working with those developers, because that absolutely wasn't me. So I guess that is sort of a lesson that I learned about the difference between the two, and what my place in that was, basically. Let's see. Else. Something I don't see mentioned a lot is, how do you go about bonding and maintaining a relationship with team members? That is different for every person, and definitely for every producer. And yeah, it heavily relies on who you are and who your team members are. For me, I will always be there to listen to my team members if and when they need me. So that is something that I over the years started putting front and center. I will drop everything if you need me. And that means that I'm not going to hold your hand. I will need you to come to me, because I can't sense it if there's something going on. If I spot it, then of course I'm going to ask, but I can't see everything because every person is different. So I just wanted to make sure that I could do that I could be there always. And that is something that I would also try to communicate to them as much as possible, and be very open and inviting about that. Explicitly say, like, hey, I am here. You can ask me anything. And then whenever someone did approach, be as open and inviting as I could. Take the time to listen, primarily listen, not necessarily even give advice, just be there. And I think that in the end, with the team members for whom that worked, and I'm not saying it worked for everyone, that let me bond with them very closely. But otherwise, I'm still very much learning about that myself as well. So I've worked with a lot of people over those 6 and something years, and before that during the organization of events. But I am absolutely not perfect at it, and I still have a lot to learn about it as well. Next one. How much of a challenge is it to port a game to console? Level of complexity of the game aside, what advice do you have for someone who is self-publishing and trying to do their own port? Asking for a friend. That depends on your engine, on the version of your engine, on whether you have network functionality or not, whether there is official support for that engine from the platforms that you're targeting, whether your game has the UI already set up for that particular platform. So there is a ton of stuff that comes into play when you're talking about that. And that just really requires a deeper dive into what your project is and that sort of thing. In broad strokes, the main engines like, say, a Unity or Unreal have official support for the main console platforms. So that is going to be a plus. If you are on the latest version of, say, a Unity or an Unreal, that is going to help a lot because eventually console platform holders deprecate their support for the older versions of the engines. If you have a single player game with very limited online functionality, that's going to be easier. But if you, for example, heavily rely on your multiplayer or your networking elements, that's going to make it more challenging. So there are a lot of different things that come into play. Complexity of, like, if your game is entirely single-threaded and if you have a lot of different things going on that require a lot of computational power, you can get away with a lot more on PC than you can on console. So that's also something that's going to come into play. And I'm sure there are a couple more things that I'm overlooking right now, but those are definitely some of the things that can be massive differentiators in how easy it is to port. And of course, if you have a PC game that but just like, for example, say a City Skylines is entirely focused on keyboard and mouse, then that conversion to controller, where you have a lot fewer buttons and the configuration is different, that's going to be a challenge. So that's another thing. I see your crying smiley face. I'm sure you have some challenges in your future. But it's exciting challenges. And, also know that there are a lot of developers out there that have gone before you and done either the same or similar things that you can ask for advice. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, there's a lot of people there that can help. Let's see. Do you use the Scrum methodology for some project that you're part of? If so, if yes, how frequent? So I am a producer who has never done Scrum before. And that's because I've been on the publishing side. So the publishing side is inherently completely waterfall. And that is because we very heavily rely on certain milestones to be able to get certain work done without wasting money, basically. So, for example, you have to request age ratings for your game. And that means that you have to show the age rating boards what all the pertinent content is that is in your game. If your game isn't finished, then you're going to have to request age ratings multiple times. And especially if you're doing retail, that can cost a lot of money. So on the publishing side, you have several milestones that you, in a very waterfall fashion, that you have to meet before you can continue with the different services that you're offering a developer. And as I've not been on the development side, I've not engaged in either Scrum or any other form of Agile myself. So I look up to a lot of the different people in my game production Discord because they have a lot of experience with that. In the recent Agile and Scrum panel that we hosted, we had a few experts who've been in the industry for 10 to 15 years talking about how they engage with that. And I can point you to a lot of different people that would be happy to give you advice on that, or join the Discord and come and ask yourself. But I have absolutely no idea. Let's see. Yes, Aspet is asking if there was a recording of that panel. There is. We are still working through a couple of hiccups to be able to get that recording up on the Game Production podcast, but there is a recording and it will be live. And all the speakers from that panel are also around in the Discord as well. Let's see. And I absolutely agree with Aspet saying that you need to take enough time to go through lot check and certification and submission. So if you do, this is to follow up on what Graham asked about porting a game to console, you are not going to pass your first submission. That is a fact of life. You will just have to accept it. In my life so far, of all those 50 plus games that I've worked with, again, that's been 2 who managed to get through on their first submission. And those were, one of them was a super experienced team, and the other one was a single player, linear narrative driven game that had already passed submission on one platform and then submitted to other platforms. All of the other teams needed at least 2 submissions. So make sure that you take a month, and all your platform holders and your publisher will be very grateful for your having accepted that fact of life that you will need to take that time. You don't have to be afraid of it, of cert. It's also something that you can prepare for very well by working with a QA vendor who is specialized in making sure that you can pass those checks. So there are plenty of QA vendors that have testers who can do a check of the entire list in like 1.5 days per platform, and they are going to tell you what's wrong and how you can fix it. And if it's something that you can't fix for one reason or another, they can help you request a waiver from the platform holder and get through certification if it's an item that can be waived at all. Feel free to ask me anything in particular via DM if you're interested. Yeah, I think I got the questions that were in the chat. If there's anyone else that has questions about just about anything, go ahead. I will either do my best to answer, or I will tell you that I don't know the answer, because that happens all the time too. Maybe Glenn Hendry has questions.
I'm giving everyone a chance to post theirs. Okay, that's Abba is out. Arm is out. Cleo? Further questions?
Hello. Yeah, Jet Fuel here. I'd like
Jet
to
Fuel.
ask about like working with Facebook on developing games. Do you have any insights into that? Like, is there like a specific port? So, for instance, if I develop a game and put it on Android and the Apple Store, is there any specific like how exactly would one work with Facebook on integrating a game into their system?
I have absolutely never worked with Facebook before, so if it's anything like working with any other platform, usually there is a sign-up procedure that you go through to make sure that you're officially recognized as a developer, and after that there will be some sort of portal or documentation that will help with most of the questions that you have. Given that Facebook Gaming is a massive platform with tons of developers, I don't doubt that they have, just like the other platforms, procedures and documentation and support to help you get through that process. They definitely should. But I'm sorry, I don't have experience with Facebook.
No worries. Thank you. It's been great.
Right. Any other questions?
You mentioned QA vendors for gaming. Is this something you mean that they're people that specialize in game QA?
Absolutely. So just like you have developers and you have publishers, you also have a lot of service providers. And service providers come in a lot of different flavors. You have companies that specialize in localization, companies that specialize in different kinds of QA. You have companies that specialize in play testing, in games user research, that sort of thing. You also have companies that specialize in doing analytics. And then everything from outsourcing development work, art and programming and design and composers and all that sort of thing. So there are a lot of different QA companies out there. They will specialize in things like compliance testing, so the certification and compliance checks for console, but also functional testing, so just making sure that everything works. There's also compatibility testing, where you're checking your game on all the different combinations of hardware that exist, and that's of course mostly applicable to PC and mobile. And localization QA, so to make sure that languages with different characters or languages with longer words or that sort of thing also work in the specific context in your game that your dialogue boxes support dynamic text fitting, breaking off words, and that sort of thing. So QA is absolutely something that you have specific vendors for that specialize in that. If you want if you have specific questions about that, feel free to hit me up in DMs. I think I have like 40 plus vendors on my list because
I will definitely hit you up then.
yeah, no, there are
Same.
so many of them out there. There is not a week that goes by that I don't have a cold email from either a localization company or a QA testing company. Hi, do you want to buy my services? I'm like, I am so happy that I have my standard few partners that I'm very happy to work with, because otherwise I would not be able to navigate this maze of all these service providers that exist out there. Anything else?
I think
Yes,
that.
for example. Sorry.
Sorry, you were saying something. Somebody posted a question that I missed.
No, Aspet was writing in the chat that you could, for example, be getting cold emails from one of the specific service providers that's out there. There are a lot of them that are very aggressive in the amount of emails that they sent out, especially cold messages.
Yes. All right. I think we have covered everything. If nobody has any final questions, I think we can probably just wrap up the session.
Sure.
All right.
In that case, guys, thank you all so much for listening. I hope it was of value to you. If you have further questions or if you want to know anything, hit me up in DMs. Happy to see if I can be of more use in some way.
All right. Excellent. Ironically, we have a final question. What's the best place to hit you up?
Discord or LinkedIn. So I don't really do social media otherwise, but on Discord, this is my Discord account, so you can add me and DM me. And my LinkedIn, I'll also post that in the chat in a moment.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, thank you, Phil, for the presentation, Juney. It meant a lot. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Your questions were awesome. We'll sort out the recording and post it on the YouTube channel shortly. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend.
Thank
Bye.
you.